that. You are hopefully as excited as we are to be in SIM 341. This is the first look at Microsoft System Center Data Protection Manager 2012. So it was actually just this time last year that we were actually announcing the RTM and the general availability of DPM 2010. But the guys have been really, really busy. And so we were very excited to talk about 2012 today. My primary area of focus is Data Protection Manager. I've actually been with the DPM team since DPM v1 was about 30 days old. So about 5.5 years I've been primarily focused on DPM as a product. So hopefully you'll understand then why I have so much enthusiasm for this technology. Joining me today is my friend Prabhu from the development team. Prabhu has been not with DPM quite as long, but for quite a bit of that investment as well. And so between the two of us, we're going to hopefully give you 74 minutes of goodness. Before we jump into the DPM 2012 features, though, we kind of want to talk for just a few minutes and help you understand the trajectory. What were we trying to solve for when we started DPM, and where are we up until this point? Because I think that helps explain where we're going to go next. If you kind of think back, way back in the day, Windows NT 3.5, 4.0 kind of thing. For a long time, Microsoft kind of had this model of if we build it, someone else will back it up. Right? You know, for a long time, you know, other than the NT backup utility, we were pretty much relying on third-party backup technologies to actually do the backup and recovery of most Microsoft workloads. And that worked out pretty well for a long time. What we started to see in 2003, 2004 particularly was as you were starting to adopt some of the more advanced workloads from Microsoft, so as we started getting closer to Exchange 2007, SharePoint 2007, what you were telling us was that in many cases the legacy backup solutions weren't doing an adequate job of backing up those platforms. It was great on a standalone Exchange server, not so much on CCR. It was great on a standalone SQL server, didn't know what a content database was and how to navigate the rest of the SharePoint farm. Those are some of the things we started to hear from you. And so back in early 2003, we came up with this thing called Volume Shadow Copy Services, or VSS. And VSS is basically the secret plumbing that says, if you as a backup application write your stuff this way, and me as a production application like Exchange or SQL, we write our app that way, then we promise they'll always work together. VSS writers, VSS requesters, kumbaya, that's how backup was supposed to work. The challenge is that a lot of the heterogeneous backup solutions particularly weren't able to leverage VSS because they have this general purpose backup architecture that basically backs up anything from an iPod to a mainframe, great from a general purpose perspective, but doesn't necessarily get to take advantage of best use practices like VSS. So around 2005, December specifically, we released a product called Data Protection Manager 2006. And the primary thing that we were focused on in DPM 2006 was get rid of the tape drives and the branches. Centralized backup of branches, bring that disk-based data back to corporate. Get rid of the tape drives. In fact, in the first year that Microsoft used it, we got rid of our own tape drives in the field. We saved $1.4 million a year just in tape. So, disk to disk. We also enabled some end-user restore capabilities that file services provided for us. It was all around centralized backup. But we knew there was a lot more we needed to do. Came out 1 year later, DPM 2007, or what we internally call DPM v2. We did a couple things. One, we knew it wasn't just about file, right? The whole reason why we were getting into the space was because of things like Exchange and SQL and SharePoint. So we needed to add those. So DPM 2007, we added application support. Similarly, you told us back in DPM 2006 days, you said, you know, I like what you're doing for disk to disk, and we're actually pretty early on disk to disk from that perspective, but if I've still got to use somebody else's tape solution for my end goal, why would I go with the other thing? The other folks are starting to figure out disk. I guess I'll just wait. So in DPM 2007, we added disk as well as tape. We also added things like system state protection as well. All right, and then a couple years more pass, and now we're in DPM 2010. It was just a little before this time last year. And we added things such as more advanced workloads. We added more virtualization support. We added Windows Client. We've got another session this afternoon on how to protect Windows Client-based data with DPM. It's a very different experience for 2010 users. And then also, what you told us in DPM 2007 was, hey, you're starting to get this stuff pretty close. Oh, by the way, I need a lot of DPM servers in my environment, and manageability is becoming a challenge. So we need to start working on scalability. So that's kind of the journey that we've had so far. Basically, we started with, one more click, there we go. We started with branch files and disk. We moved that up to application servers, virtualization hosts, added tape. And then we started stretching out around enterprise workloads and Windows clients. Now, I kind of want to focus on something for a second. Our North Star, what we focused on for the first 5 years that Microsoft has been around, has been best for Windows from Microsoft. That's kind of been the North Star that we kind of focused on around this. And I'm here today to tell you that the reason that we have that focus, the reason that we are really laser focused on that is because we want you not only to have a great experience with backup and recovery, we want you to have a great experience with Exchange and SQL and SharePoint and Hyper-V and Windows Client. And if you don't have a confident backup and recovery capability of those workloads, that's going to affect your willingness to do a broad deployment of those technologies. That's why we're here, is to ensure that high supportability of those workloads. So that was our North Star for the first 5 years. So then what we had to do is figure out, okay, what's next? And so we asked. We came back to you guys and said, okay, we think we've got most of the major pieces covered. What should we be looking at next? And here's what you told us. You said you want a centralized console. You said that you've got DPM deployed across a wide part of your environment. Usually you've got DPM servers in multiple locations. You want a single pane of glass to monitor it, manage it, and report against it. You told us to continue focusing on advanced workloads. You said that in many cases, what you gave us feedback on was that, yeah, I've got a couple Macs I'd like to back up, and I've got a couple Linux machines I'd like to back up. But bottom line is, I really like being able to back up Exchange and SQL and have that one throat to choke Microsoft backup and recovery experience. And in many cases, if you were heterogeneous, you already knew that you could use your heterogeneous backup solution to back up those other workloads, and by the way, back up DPM to the same set of heterogeneous tapes, and so you were okay there. You told us you needed some more enterprise scale deployment scenarios, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that might mean in just a few minutes. And then lastly, you said, I've got 6 different System Center products. Why don't they all talk to each other? Okay? Hopefully, one of the themes that you have heard this week, and I know it's only Tuesday, is System Center 2012 is a very integrated experience across all the different platforms. So that's pretty much what the feedback was for what to do next. Admittedly, we've only had a year, right, since DPM 2010 shipped. So this actually is the feature set. These were the top asks, and so today we're going to actually talk you through how we're intending to deliver that to you over the next several months. All right, so with that, I'm going to invite Prabhu, and we're going to talk about what's in DPM 2012. Prabhu, are we good to go?
Yep, we are good to go. Thank you, Jason. And good morning, and I'm very happy to be standing here sharing what is new in DPM 2012 with you folks. And to start with, we are actually focusing very heavily on centralized management. And I know that if you are customers who have been using DPM 2010 for a long time, either in the forums or through the news groups, you have heard loud and clear that centralized management of a large environment is actually very important, and that is something that we are focusing on. Secondly, we are actually focusing on getting the core infrastructure improved so that you can start protecting non-domain joined missions. Now, we already had the capability to actually protect non-domain joined missions with DPM 2010, and that was in the form of, you set up local groups on both the DPM server and the production servers, and then you actually synchronize your, the passwords and so forth. But what we heard very clearly that in enterprises, it's actually much better if we actually use certificates to actually protect those kind of environments. And you're actually seeing certificate-based authentication coming in as a core infrastructure piece in DPM 2012. Now, the other thing that we are actually focusing on is on the tape vault. Now, on the tape front, we have heard many requests to actually improve the amount of scale that we are actually doing, and also second, improve the co-location factor. Now, co-location is a technical word. By co-location, what we actually mean is, can I put more than one SQL database, more than one data source onto the same tape? And while that capability was there in DPM 2010, where it lacked is in terms of flexibility. Now, you can actually say, co-locate the data sources so that my tape is actually utilized much more higher, but the cost that you needed to pay is DPM will automatically decide which data sources will be co-located on which tape. Now, there are some customers who actually really like this hands-off approach where DPM took care of things for them. But of course, there were customers who said, hey, can I actually pick and choose so that the data sources with similar retention period, for example, get co-located on the same tape, so that when I send them off-site, or if I'm bringing back them on-site, it is actually much more easy for me to do it. So you're actually going to be seeing smarter media co-location coming in. And coming to the workload enhancements per se, SharePoint. That's one of the workloads that is actually growing very rapidly, and DPM is actually extending a very good protection for it. One of the great things about SharePoint protection is that you could actually protect the entire farm in a single click and still retain your capability to pull out a single 1 MB document out from the SharePoint farm. And DPM actually did all the magic for you. It would actually figure out where the web front-end servers are sitting, where are your SQL back-end servers sitting. It will actually find out the fan-out architecture of your SharePoint farm and protect it as a single entity. Now, with DPM 2010, when you had to recover a single data source, unfortunately, so let's imagine that you actually had a SharePoint farm with a content database that is 100 gig in size. And one of your users said, hey, I deleted this PowerPoint presentation. Can you actually get that back to me? So what DPM would actually do is mount the 100 GB database and then pull the 1 MB file from it. But to mount it, it would actually essentially transfer the 100 GB over the network. So while that meant the functionality, when it actually came to performance, it was an unnecessary data transfer, and there was time being spent there. Now, with SharePoint Optimized Item Level Restore, you no longer need to move the database if you need to just pull out one single file from it. So that's the key improvement that is coming on SharePoint.
And I think we actually have some slides a little bit later on. We're actually going to take down through a couple more of these other features too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Hyper-V ILR, the DPM can actually run as a VM. So you don't need a separate physical host, even if you're protecting the Hyper-V host. Now, while that capability existed in DPM 2010, you couldn't do an item-level recovery from such an environment. So with DPM 2012, we are enhancing the item-level recovery of Hyper-V protection. And we are doing that even when DPM is running inside a virtual machine. And lastly, generic data source. So while we are actually doing a good job in terms of protecting your Exchange, SQL, SharePoint, Hyper-V, all the applications shipped out of Microsoft, we also heard that can I actually protect some of the other Microsoft-based workloads which are actually running there? Dynamics is one such example. VMM is one such example. So we are actually enhancing our core infrastructure to actually provide generic data source support, and you'll actually see much more of that while we actually get through the demo.
So when we were talking about centralized backup, one of the big things when we reached out was we said, okay, tell us what centralized monitoring, tell us what centralized monitoring means. And so when we took the survey and we said, what does this mean to you? What do you really need from it? A whopping 96% of you said the main thing we need is I need a single pane of glass. How are we actually going to monitor the health of the protection states and the health of my DPM servers themselves? As well as I want remote troubleshooting. I am tired of term serving manually into each of my DPM boxes to actually drive that experience. You also told us that actually just term serving into the consoles themselves was actually an arduous challenge. So you wanted to go ahead and actually have a true remote console type experience in the next DPM generation. One of the other things that you also told us in that upper right-hand corner was you said role-based management. Today in DPM 2010, admittedly, you have to be pretty much an admin for almost all the major functions that you'd want to do. So you wanted the ability to actually say, okay, how do we actually scope that down? And then as we kind of scale down some of the other options, some of you also said, yeah, I'd like to have some centralized reporting functionality as well. And then lastly, you'd like to have some centralized deployment mechanisms. Now, by the way, some of these things are manifested in DPM 2012. Others of them, including things like centralized deployment, you actually don't even have to wait for DPM 2012. When you come to the client session, you actually hear some of the things we're doing around auto deployment using Operations Manager's Management Pack functionality to get that done as well. So this is kind of our guiding star as how we do centralized backup.
So that's actually a very good point, Jason, because while we actually fanned out wide across all our customer base, right, from Mark to actually the enterprises, what we predominantly heard is that the place where I'm actually spending the most of the time today is actually just running my environment. And that is what you actually need to focus on. And hence, when we actually started, working on what should be the scope for the DPN 2012 release, which is internally called as the V4 release, is that we are going to be focusing on centralized monitoring and troubleshooting. We are going to make sure that you can run your backup environment from a single place. Secondly, we will be focusing on remote administration so that you can actually do all your admin tasks, change management tasks, sitting from a single place. And we'll do all of this using a very secure role-based model. So you no longer have to be a DPM admin. And when we actually reached across to enterprises, we could clearly see that there's a team who's actually designing the thing. There's a team which is actually building it and then giving it to ops team for deployment. The ops team is kind of running it, and the ops team itself is actually tiered from support to escalation engineer and so forth. And you don't want to open the gate saying that, please come be an admin on the DPM product. So with role-based administration, what you're getting is the capability to model the roles and responsibilities and teams that you have in your environment today as is with DPM. Now, we'll be touching a little bit about reporting. So we do actually have the core infrastructure going for enabling data collection from multiple DPM servers and bringing them all to a single central console server. So that is something that we'll actually see in DPM v4. Over the next few releases, we'll be actually focusing on looking at more dynamic environments where things come and go as we make the transition to private cloud and how those scenarios need to be handled. So let's actually focus on centralized management. So what came clearly from our research is that the theme that customers, meaning you actually told us was, make sure that have a single console. And I need a single console for the data center. I cannot have multiple consoles for the data center. Secondly, when you are designing the features, make sure that the features are designed such that I'm spending the least amount of time actually keeping the things running. So reduce the management cost by reducing the time people need to spend on the product itself. And lastly, don't try to reinvent in terms of how you do role-based management, how you actually integrate with my environment. Don't ask me to write any other integration pieces. Rather, I already have System Center with me, so why don't you integrate within of the System Center family of products and give me the right experience? So starting. So let's focus on the single console for the data center. So with DPN 2012, you'll be able to monitor up to 100 DPM servers using a single console. Now, for those folks in the audience who actually answered one of the surveys that we sent out where we asked, at how many DPM servers do you think the need for centralized management becomes important? And there were 2 customers who actually said, 2. More than 1, I need a central console. I cannot go to 2 places. So we are happy to share that you can go all the way up to 100 DPM servers or up to 50,000 protected data sources.
Let's talk about that for a second. So it is either or. So that could mean that you have 100 production servers with 500 data sources each. Could mean that you have 200 DPM servers with 250 data sources each. But the basic rough math is, and your mileage will vary, is we're looking at roughly 50,000 data sources being managed from a single pane of glass. And to make sure we're thinking about this the right way, a data source is a database. It is a storage group. It is a virtual machine. It is a volume on a file server. You're talking about 50,000 of those across your environment now being managed by a single pane of glass.
Yeah, thank you. And the other thing is customers are telling us that I cannot wait till DPM 2012 comes out and deploy DPM 2012 and then get the benefits of centralized management. In fact, they want to start day 1 out with centralized management. So with DPM 2012, what we have done is we have made sure that it is actually backward compatible. So once you install the DPM 2012 centralized management console, you'll not only be able to manage DPM 2012 servers, you'll be able to centrally manage all your existing DPM 2010 servers also with the same high fidelity experience that you'll get with DPM 2012.
And in fact, I think that when we do the demo, you'll actually have some DPM 2010 servers as part of the mix.
Yeah.
Yep.
So our demo is actually riding on top of 2010 servers instead of 2012, just to make sure the point is coming across much more clearly, right? So let's actually come to the second part of the value prop, which is our promise to help you reduce your management cost. And let's actually look at how we actually aim to go about doing that. The first thing is, yeah, we are going to be giving you a single console, and that single monitoring console will help you to do centralized monitoring. It will enable you to do role-based administration. You can do remote administration, saying that you can manage your DPM servers from one single location, meaning the personas are actually different here. So centralized monitoring is for the monitoring upstream persona. Centralized management or remote administration is more for the DPM admin persona. And also in enterprises where recoveries are much more frequent, we actually have a recovery operator as a separate role, and you can actually do remote recoveries all starting from a single place. And do that all through secure role-based management. So this is how we plan to deliver on the promise that you can actually have a single pane of glass across the entire DPM environment you actually have on your data center.
In fact, later on when we talk about role-based management, we have a sample table that actually shows you several different roles, several different kinds of permissions you can have, and by the way, those are customizable, so we'll get a chance to even dig in that more.
Yeah. So secondly, how do we actually, the next question that we asked is, okay, I've given you the single pane of glass, how do I reduce the time that you're actually spending on the product itself to keep things running? So what we are actually going to be doing, and you'll actually see more of that in the demo, is that you'll have remote corrective action, so that from the single central console, you can take the corrective action. You no longer need to log in to your DPM servers to actually resolve your issues. Secondly, when you're trying to troubleshoot, when an issue gets escalated and you're trying to troubleshoot the issue, we'll be giving you a scope troubleshooting console that helps you focus in on a particular issue out of your entire DPM environment. And lastly, we'll be able to give you a button where you can spend your time more on understanding the environment which is causing the backups to fail, and less time worrying about how do I get it back running again. So let's imagine a scenario that your server were to go down, one of your SQL servers went down last night, and you actually brought it back online today. Now, how long will it take for you to actually get your backups running again? That's what push to resume backups will do. It will give you a single button to get your backups running again, and you will be able to see that in a demo. So lastly, we heard many customers that, can you help me prioritize the work that I'm doing so that I can actually focus on the most important issues in my environment? And we are actually doing that in three folds. First, we are going to be giving you an SLA-based alerting capability, so that you will actually see the alerts surfaced on your centralized management only if the SLA that you actually set is violated. So let's assume that you're protecting a SQL database once every 15 minutes, or twice a day you are actually protecting it. Let's actually go with twice a day, once in every 12 hours. And you can actually set an SLA saying that as long as I have a recovery point, one recovery point per day, my SLA is not broken, so don't let me know even if there's a failure. Now, I know that there are some customers who actually prefer to be intimated on every failure that happens. You can do that too. The product is flexible, where you can actually model the SLAs as per your requirement and your environment. Secondly, we are helping the alerts getting consolidated into a single root cause alerts. So previously with DPN 2010, though you had a MOM pack with the DPN 2010, you would actually see that the alerts are all coming here. What you'll see here with DPN 2012 is that the alerts are all consolidated so that you see a single alert for a single root cause. So if one disk goes down, you don't see 20 alerts, you see only one alert. If one server goes down, you see only one alert instead of 200 alerts, even if there are 200 databases sitting on that particular server. And lastly, enterprises have a good system operations procedure or manuals which are actually written, and they have escalation rules. And typically, people start out resolving an issue, it gets escalated to the admin team, because you know what broke last night was the connectivity to the SAN. So the person who's actually in charge of storage in my backup team needs to look into that issue. So we actually found out that there are trends here, and what we have done is we have actually given the ability to categorize the alerts based on whether it's an infrastructure issue or is it a backup failure issue. Lastly, whatever you are actually seeing here in this demo and as a value prop for DPN 2012 is completely extensible, and you can actually script using PowerShell to extend and meet any other scenarios that you might need. The last promise is to be able to integrate into your existing environment, and we are actually doing that by using Ops Manager as the central console and not writing our own central console. And this gels well with most customers because the Ops Manager is already your monitoring solution. That's where your monitoring team is actually sitting. So by getting into Ops Manager, we are integrating into the existing workflows that you have. So any ticketing workflows that you have will automatically come for free, and you actually get a single pane of glass. And you can, what we support with DPN 2012 will be both Ops Manager 2007 R2 and also the new version that actually comes out.
So let's kind of talk through that, just one last thing, because I want to make sure we get a lot of chance for demo time as well. The whole idea here is by using Operations Manager as single pane of glass, when we looked out, and in fact, if anyone came to the Operations Manager 2012 session yesterday, we shared some stats, such as, I think it's 53% of all Windows servers are actually monitored by Operations Manager today. So you already, in many cases, already have that deployment. It's even a larger percentage of that are licensed for that because you're licensed for the System Center suite. So you're already consuming that pane of glass already. So what we wanted to do is actually start using that, not just as that, and here's the key thing. We already have a DPM 2010 management pack. You can today monitor the health of your DPM 2010 servers. But the key word here is monitor. In DPM 2012, it's manage. You'll be essentially managing your DPM environment when it comes to the 2012 infrastructure. And by using Operations Manager as that pane of glass, not only does it give you that one console, Operations Manager, of course, has a real mature set of extensions for other connectors. So it'll actually provide you a ticketing system through System Center Service Manager. It can actually also integrate with other managers of managers because of its connections upstream as well. So this continues to give you that single pane of glass. And I know I'm anxious to see how the demo is going to go.
Yeah. So let's actually get on to the demo. Thank you, Jason. So let me introduce the demo environment here. So what you're seeing here is the SCOM server. So I'm going to use the words interchangeably here. I can call it as the SCOM server or the centralized management server. It's both the same. So for us, for the DPM team, it's actually the central console server. Secondly, I actually have two DPM servers. Both are running DPM 2010, and I have a couple of servers which are running the SQL workload for protection. So let me actually log on to the SCOM server. So how many of you are already familiar with Ops Manager here? That's close to 50% of the room. So for the remaining people, let me actually give you a quick overview of what you actually are seeing on the screen. On the left side, you actually have the alert view, which is actually all the alerts. And I have a view here defined as all alerts, which is one single view into your entire DPM environment of 100 DPM servers coming in a single view. Of course, you can actually split it and categorize it. What you're seeing on the screen is some of the examples that we have, and it is all customizable without writing any code. Secondly, if you're a DPM customer already, you'll know that there's a protection view in DPM where you can look at the data sources protected and look at its status. So here is the all data source view. Yeah, most of them are red because I need to actually demo something where there are issues in the environment. I hope your environment doesn't look as red as this. Right? So the all data source view essentially is one single view for all the data sources. You can, of course, categorize it again to SQL, SharePoint, Hyper-V, completely customizable. On the right-hand side here is the action pane where you can actually take action. So let me actually start out with a scenario here. Let's assume that I'm a DPM admin in charge of storage and the agent health. And what I actually see is an alert here saying that the disk threshold has actually exceeded. If you're in the DPM world, you will understand that DPM actually has got a volume where it stores the backup data. Sometimes the volume gets full and needs to be grown. Now, we do have an auto grow feature in DPM 2010, but there are scenarios where some customers don't prefer to use that particular feature. Now, let's assume that I'm an admin and I'm actually seeing this alert. What I would do with DPM 2010 is actually to figure out, okay, so this particular disk is on a particular DPM server, which is DPM server 11 here. I will actually log on to the DPM server using terminal remote desktop, and typically that takes between 30 seconds to anywhere up to 2 minutes or 3 minutes, depending on the environment. And that is if you're able to get a free session. most often you need to engage in a workflow where you're saying, hey, people, can you please free up a session? I'm trying to troubleshoot this issue on this DPM server, blah, blah, blah. Then you'll log on to the server, bring up the UI, search for the same alert, and then you'll start growing the volume. Let's see how it is with the DPN 2012. With DPN 2012, I actually select the alert here. I go to the alert description. The recommended action essentially says, please execute the take recommended action action. Now, on the right side, I have the take recommended action. I just click on that. Now, what happens behind the scenes is the central console is actually finding out the DPM server, and right here, within 5 seconds, you have the capability to modify the disk on a DPM server sitting on your central management console.
So let's talk about that for a second. So while he's changing these values, in the past, and again, this is Operations Manager. So Operations Manager has management pack functionality. Part of that management pack has embedded knowledge. So normally you might have double-clicked on it as opposed to scrolling down, and we would see what is the cause of this error, what is the likely scenario this error is being caused by, and then there's a resolution set of steps on there. And I think as far as where we are, we're not quite yet at beta, so we don't have all the rich knowledge for those resolutions and causes there. But the reality is that typical to most Operations Manager scenarios, that bottom bar is going to have some kind of recommended course correction that will do. In many cases, it's a hyperlink. So in this case, we've got in 2010, it would have been term serve in, go to the session, right-click, modify disk parameters, and go into it. What we've done is we've embedded a lot of those binaries actually within the Operations Manager UI, or that centralized console experience, so we never have to leave that pane of glass.
Exactly. And the point to note here is this is not restricted to modify disk allocation. This actually translates to most of the other frequent actions that you will do. And this is one of the ways in which we are delivering on the promise to give you remote corrective action. So if you're a monitoring team person, you no longer need to log into any DPM server. You can do all your corrective action sitting on the central console.
So just think about, for those of you that are DPM 2010 users, anytime that you would have gone to the DPM UI and you would have gone in, especially like in the protection, the recovery tabs, you would have right-clicked and had some kind of small applet for a behavior. Might have been like a consistency check, might have been create a new recovery point. All those kinds of verbs are now within the pane of glass.
Yes. So the second scenario which I actually want to demo to you today is, let's assume that I'm actually in the ops team guy, and I actually come in the morning, and my job is to figure out, okay, what are the backup failure alerts and how do I get the backups running again? And that's what I do. So I'm here in the morning and I actually see an alert that actually says the recovery point creation failed with agent not responding. Now this is the example that I alluded to earlier on in the session where I said the servers actually periodically might be taken down for maintenance, which can cause your backups to fail. And if you're the backup team ops guy, what you do as a first step is to figure out, okay, the backups fail, is the agent running again? Is the issue has been resolved or not? So with DPN 2012, what you can actually do is select the alert here and press on the button called as troubleshoot. Now, when I actually press on troubleshoot, what it actually does is it actually opens up a DPN 2012 remote console. And this is not just the admin console, this is actually a scoped console. So in this way, you're able to zoom in into a particular issue, eliminate all the other noise that are actually there in your environment, and then focus on this single issue that actually happened. So what you're seeing here are not all the alerts on the DPM server, but just the alert related to agent not responding. The cool thing here is, on the DPM server side, you can actually see that there are 5 alerts, whereas on the operations manager, on the central console, you actually saw only 1 alert. So that's an example of the alert consolidation which we are doing so that you have only 1 alert per root cause, right? So I can do all sort of things here. Now, if you're a person who's actually familiar with DPM, what you might want to do is look at, okay, let me see the trend. Let me see the history of how these alerts actually came, and I can click on Show Inactive Alerts. So what it will do is show all the inactive alerts, but filter it to the error that you are actually troubleshooting on. And so forth, I can look at other alerts also. So let me go back to the main scenario. So I'm trying to troubleshoot why the agent is not responding. So I go to the Management tab. This is where I actually see the agent status, right? I select the agent, and the agent status at this point is actually unknown. So what I do is I press on Refresh Information, and the refresh essentially says that the agent is still not responding. It's actually in an error state, and the detail error code tells me can you please check whether it is actually disabled, right? So at this point, what I do is I log on to the server. Let me switch the servers to the actual production server, the SQL server, right? And here, I actually see that the DPM remote agent is actually in a disabled state. Now, if all the errors that you hit in your DPM environment is as simple as this, where you can just log onto the server and enable a service and get it going, that would be wonderful. But again, the idea here is to focus on the fact that once we actually enable the service here, let's actually go and enable it here, right? Say automatic, okay. Once I am actually done, I can come back to my ops manager and I can press on a single button called as resume DPM backups. Now, this is the resume feature that we actually touched upon before. So what resume DPM backups does is, if I am an ops guy, tier 1 support or tier 2 support, I follow a set of steps that is given in my product knowledge, and I can check whether the service is up and running. That's the amount of thing that I can do. Post that, it's tough for me to understand, okay, what are all the data sources on that particular production server? Is it Exchange? Is it SQL? Should I do a consistency check job? Should I actually do an expressful job? Should I do a sync? Is it a file server? So all that complexity, we are actually taking it away, and you can just press on the single button, which is called as resume disk backups. Once that is done, DPM will do all the load. It will actually pull the entire load for you, and it will figure out what kind of data source exists, what is the state of the replica, and it will bring everything up to backup running state again in a single click. Okay, so here's another scenario which will illustrate how we actually do remote administration and management. So I'm here looking at all the DPM servers and all the production groups. I select a production group here, and if you're a DPM admin who wants to modify your production group, you can just simply click on Manage Production, and DPM will take you directly from the central console to that particular DPM server and then select the production group for you so that you can simply click on Modify Production. Again, if you are doing remote administration, do that in a couple of clicks, all from central console.
So I want to make sure that we have time for the other demo sets. Are there any other demos that you want to do for Central Console? I forget.
Yeah, we can actually do a remote recovery here and then show them how it works. So imagine that you are actually getting a request to recover a payroll database, right? So I can actually click on all data sources here, click on payroll here, and then say recover the data source. Now, instead of you actually finding out the DPM server, logging on and other things, similar to the other demos that you saw, what we are doing here is opening up a remote console and selecting the data source for you so that you can simply press on recover and then go ahead with your recoveries. So again, recover, 2 steps. So this is pretty much the demos that we have for centralized management. We have a couple of demos for the other areas.
So let's go ahead and go back and take you through a couple other areas that are there. All right, so one of the things we mentioned is that because we're using Operations Manager as our centralized console for DPM, we automatically get a new ability to use role-based management as well, right? So as promised, so this is actually a table of some of the sample roles that you might do. You might have operator roles, you might have just tape operators just in general, and then on the left-hand side there's a list of all the different kinds of attributes of different kinds of activities that you can now control whether they do or not. This is a pre-configured set, but you can actually customize it from there. Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other enterprise scenarios that we talked through. One of the things that Prabhu mentioned a little bit earlier is that we actually do some non-domain-based protection today. But the way that we do it today is that you create a local login account on a per-machine basis so that the DPM agent can actually connect to those boxes. And for smaller environments, that probably makes sense. One of the things that some of you larger enterprise customers told us was, I really don't want to, either I don't want to, or courtesy of my security team, I'm not allowed to create local accounts on all my different resource servers. So instead, what we wanted to do was give you a different alternative for that. And so the idea is actually to do certificate-based protection as well. Can you give us a little color on what that looks like?
Yes. We don't actually have the certificate-based demo.
Not demo, just talk through.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. So with certificate-based protection, what you can actually do is install certificates on the production server. You can install the certificate on the DPM server, and then you can actually establish the trust. And the second part is that this actually is supported in a clustered configuration also. So if you actually have clusters on your non-trusted domain, so you will actually see the support extend very seamlessly to the certificate-based protection also.
Exactly. All right. We also have some enhancements around media location as well. In DPM 2010, we supported media co-location, but it was on a per-server basis. We needed to get that more granular because you said you wanted to have more control over how that works.
Right. So as I mentioned before, so when you actually co-locate the data sources on a tape, what you want to do is be flexible and control it. An example scenario is where you want to actually put all the data sources that you want for a 2-year retention on a single, co-located on the same tape, so that when you actually send it off-site or when you're trying to bring it back on-site, it's the same tape. Now, previously with DPM 2010, while you could optimize on the storage by co-locating the data sources, what it meant is the data sources with the same retention might go to different tapes. Now, with smarter co-location feature available with the DPM 2012, you can efficiently use your tape and also optimize on your on-site and off-site workflows by using per protection group controlled co-location. So you now have the ability not constrained at a per DPM server level, you now have the flexibility at a per protection group level.
SharePoint. We mentioned a little bit earlier that we've come a long way with SharePoint. In fact, at the very beginning of the session, we talked about your satisfaction in things like SharePoint and SQL Exchange was a big part of how we shape and why we brought DPM to market. In SharePoint 2007, backing up with DPM 2007, we had this concept of a recovery farm. This was a SharePoint requirement, and basically SharePoint said they didn't want you to recover data directly back into the production farm. So what SharePoint team gave you was this concept of a recovery farm, which was a single server that was running a generic instance of SharePoint 2007. And what you would do is you would recover, you wanted a single item, you would recover the database that that item resides in back to that recovery farm, and then the SharePoint APIs would pluck that item out of the recovery farm and drop it back into your production farm. Okay, that was 2007. In SharePoint 2010, paired up with DPM 2010, SharePoint got rid of the requirement for a SharePoint recovery farm, but they still had the concept of you needed to mount a database, pluck the item out, and throw that over. So as Prabhu mentioned, you might only need a 1 meg document, but it could take you several minutes because you were restoring a large database before you could pluck that item out. One of the things we're really excited about, and we know our friends in SharePoint are too. By the way, show of hands, who in here is using SharePoint 2010 today? Okay, maybe 60, 75% of the environment, maybe? So in DPM 2012, we don't recover the database anymore. Literally, if you want a 1 meg document, the average recovery time is around 20 seconds. No longer term caching, no pre-staging the DB, just takes the item and plucks it right out. And then one more thing before we actually go into the demo piece. This is one of my favorite ones that we want to talk about. So one of the things that we innovated on in DPM 2010 was in DPM 2007, when you wanted to back up a virtualized environment, there was a trade-off you had to make. If you wanted to do a brick-level restore, you first had to do a brick-level backup. Meaning, if you put a DPM agent in a guest inside of a VM, you could back it up like it was a regular machine. You could do individual file backups and restores, and kumbaya, that was great. If you put a single DPM agent on your hypervisor hosts, and you backed up the VM as a whole, the good news was you got the whole VM, and you could recover it anyplace else, and it gave you almost like a BMR for VMs. The good news was you got the whole VM. The bad news was you got the whole VM, and that's what you could restore by, right? So in DPM 2010, we had this concept of item-level recovery, which meant you could put a single agent on your Hyper-V host today, you could back up your whole VM, and yet we give you the ability with Hyper-V ILRs to actually be able to pluck a single file out of that VM-based backup and restore that to someplace else on your network. The only caveat in the current scenario for DPM 2010 is that normally a lot of customers are starting to embrace virtualization, particularly for your infrastructure servers. So you'd like to virtualize a lot of your pieces of the System Center family, along with your AD and your domain and your DNS, et cetera. Well, because we needed to be able to mount a VHD in DPM 2010, you couldn't actually do that if DPM was itself a VM. So you had to have a physical DPM server in order to be able to do that in DPM 2010 today. With DPM 2012, we've gotten some new APIs that are out there, and so we were able to actually unblock that. So you'll now be able to have a virtualized DPM server and still be able to do item-level recovery from another Hyper-V-based backup scenario. One of the key scenarios that we see a lot of customers using this in today is, especially in branch office, where you may have only 1 or 2 physical servers in the environment, and all of your actual production resources are virtualized. You've got a virtualized file server, you might have a virtualized read-only domain controller, you've got a virtualized Exchange or SQL server. Now you can have that virtualized DPM server and still have that complete experience of being able to do backup and recovery across the other virtualized production workloads. So very excited to be able to show you that one as well. And then lastly, and I think we're going to go into our next set of demos as well, generic data source support. So if you're taking notes, this is one of the things we want you to take away. For the first 5 years that DPM has been around, what we were focused on was best for Microsoft, right? It's for Exchange, it's for SQL, for SharePoint, for Hyper-V, for Windows Client. With DPM 2012, it's not so much just best for Microsoft as much as we're now trying to look for best for Windows. And there's a very subtle difference there, meaning that instead of having to rely on our own workloads and the native VSS support that each one of them already develops beforehand, we wanted to be able to give you the ability to protect other things that are running in a Windows environment. Now, in some of those cases, those Windows-based applications will have their own VSS writer, and so we're going to talk about how we might be able to leverage those as we move forward. In other cases, they might not have their own VSS writer, but the good news is Windows Server OS does. And so we can leverage that. So I think with that, we're going to actually go into our next set of demos and show you a couple of these aspects.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. So what we are going to be seeing here is the generic data source support. And let me actually start by creating a production group here. So on this DPM server, I'm trying to create a production group, and I have only one server which is attached, and this server is actually running VMM. So with VMM, you all know that today you can actually protect the VMM database as a SQL database with the DPM. So let me actually select all SQL servers, and here I can actually see the Virtual Manager DB. I can select it, press next, 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 finish. Okay, I have now protected the Virtual Manager database. Now let me show you how it can be different with generic data source support. With a single command here that I have actually prearranged, so if I do this, what happens is now DPM becomes aware that there is an application out there called as SCVMM. So that's what actually happens. Now the demo that you are seeing, please remember that it's not about VMM protection per se. It's more about the capability that the DPM product today has, and you can extend that seamlessly to any SQL, any file, anywhere, any kind of data source, and mix and match. So here, once I have actually registered the writer with the DPM server, if I actually go ahead and click on Create Protection Group, now I do see my production server here. I continue to see all the SQL servers which are actually underneath here, but what I also see as an extra item here is the SCVMM Express writer.
So let me interject for just 1 second. A couple things to note. First of all, the reason that we're using System Center as our example, have you ever gotten a really good deal on something and someone else in your family said, hey, I want that too? Yes? Okay, so when we first said we were going to start supporting other kinds of VSS workloads, our siblings in the System Center family said, hey, you know, let's do some of that initial development with us. So what we're seeing here today is an example that uses VMM, but the bottom line is that what VMM actually has behind the scenes is indicative of a lot of the line of business applications that run on Windows. It has a SQL database. It has some kind of a file directory store. There may be a process where you need to actually drop a set of actual meta files down to a flat file. So, for example, today in SharePoint 2003, there's a utility called STS-ADM that actually will dump the metadata from SharePoint, from the SQL databases down. It's 99% SQL, 1% other stuff. STS-ADM gives us that other stuff. So whatever that packaging is of files or libraries or SQL databases or SharePoint farm objects, all of those are objects of that app. What we're doing here is saying, okay, we know how to back up that stuff. We know how to back up files. We know how to back up SQL. All of those have VSS components available to them. Let's go ahead and knit them together into a logical object, which is what we call backup component, and now expose that within the DPM console so that you can actually now manage that kind of unified data the same way that you have a one-click experience for a SharePoint farm, no matter how distributed the app might be. Same idea, right?
Right, exactly the same. And in fact, when you actually go ahead and do a recovery, you can actually recover the component, and that will recover the file configuration on your file system, the SQL database which is sitting on another server, and another SQL database which might sit on a third server. So it can have a complete fan-out architecture, very similar to SharePoint, and you can actually back that up. The settings here are same as what is available for any other data source that is natively supported for DPM. So what you get is a full fidelity solution for backing up any kind of data source which is actually up there, right? And once I actually go ahead and create the production group, you can actually see that in my production view, this data source will now start showing up as a native application supported by DPM.
That's awesome. Thank you. All right, what's next?
So we'll get back to the presentation.
Okay, actually, I think we're going to do the restore demos too, right? Or are we? Okay, actually, I think we're going to start wrapping up. Or
Yeah.
Is that all the demos that you wanted to share for us today?
Yes.
Okay.
That's it. Okay. So a couple of points that I want to actually leave you with on centralized management and generic data source before Jason actually wraps up is, our focus with centralized management has been to give you a single pane of glass, reduce the time that you actually spend on taking care of your environment, and then being able to model your existing teams using role-based management and fit into a system-centered suite of products.
Okay.
So,
awesome. All right, so one of the most common questions we get is the beta available yet? No. Next most common question I get right after that is, can I have it anyway? No. So let me tell you where we are in the process. So we have finished CTP 1, so our TAP customers have gotten their first builds, and they're kicking the tires on it pretty well. We're working on CTP 2 to give them that other experience. So we do have an active TAP program. We do have a very few TAP slots left, so we are still taking a few last-minute applications for that, depending on if you have certain workloads and certain scenarios and sizing that we're looking for that. But that is not the only way that you can experience DPM 2012 and actually get a tighter relationship for this preview. One of the things that we are launching, it's almost summer now, but one of the things we're launching this summer is called a community evaluation program. And if you're familiar with System Center, there are some other SEP programs that are currently out. We just announced the SEP program for Operations Manager 2012. Yesterday is now taking enrollment. ConfigMan Beta 2, FEP, and I think Orchestrator all are currently doing their SEPs as well. So what community evaluation programs are within System Center is, in the past, we only were able to support about maybe sometimes between 40 and 60 TAP customers worldwide, because we have a really strong, tight relationship from an engineering perspective. What SEP, it's easily tenfold that size. And so what we'll do is we'll actually partner with you. You have those private webcasts, private access to some supplemental materials. And for 2 weeks at a time in a SEP program, we focus, and everybody in the community, that being you and us, we all focus together on one feature at a time. And basically, we just all focus on what the new Central Console looks like. And then for 2 weeks, we'll spend time talking about what tape management looks like. And then we'll spend 2 weeks talking about what SharePoint IOR looks like. And you go test it on your own. You're going to test it on VHDs that we provide you. And the whole idea is to actually develop that learning set together. So it actually still gives you some deep interaction and some private access along the way. If you are interested, and hopefully at this point all of your pins are feverishly writing down, you're going to want to send an email to MSCEP. That's Management and Security SEP, which is our product team. So if you'll send an email there, we'll give you some information there. But also, you can watch my blog or the DPM blog. That'll be the first times we actually start announcing that. We'll take enrollment for about 4 weeks, and then from there, we'll publish the final schedule for how those 2-week interactions go, all the way through to RTRM. So lots of good opportunities to actually integrate with the product. And then, of course, this does kind of imply that we are working towards a summer beta program as well. Bits will be available about the same time. All right. We want to make sure we had a good amount of time for questions. So I just want to kind of follow up with a few last things before we actually open back up. Again, one of the other driving factors that we wanted to do with this whole System Center 2012 scenario is to give you that more unified management experience. You've obviously already seen how Operations Manager is that centralized console for DPM, but the integration doesn't stop there. So from a service manager perspective, in the upper right-hand corner, that is our default ticketing system. Again, because Service Manager integrates with Operations Manager to get that information out. In fact, when Prabhu showed us that scoped down troubleshooting UI, and it showed us where the server name was and that little bar at the top, if you've integrated Service Manager with Operations Manager, even your ticket ID for that trouble resolution issue will show up in that same scoped down view. From a virtual machine manager perspective, there's been some great sessions. In fact, one of our MVPs is in the audience, Mike Ressler, who actually has a great session on disaster recovery using virtual machine manager, Opalis Orchestrator, and DPM. You should check out his blog for that as well. Configuration Manager, if you come to the client session later today, you're going to learn how Configuration Manager and Operations Manager are automating client deployment. For those of you that are DPM customers, you're probably used to bringing up the agent deployment wizard, and you see all your servers on the left, and you click on one, and you drag it to the right, and then you hit send, right? And that's cool if you got 20 boxes. It's not so cool if you have 2,000. We do not insure you for carpal tunnel, and that's a pretty repetitive motion, right? So using Operations Manager Config, you can actually have those agents deploy for you. Keep on working around the side. Obviously, we're centralized console, the management packs as well. And then, yes, there is an integration pack for Opalis/Orchestrator so that you can take a lot of these key activities and actually automate them as part of a larger workflow as well. So really integrating that entire experience together as part of that System Center wave. Frankly, the idea of having all of System Center release in mass as part of 2012, this is one of the benefits we get is everyone can kind of snap to the same kind of delivery plan. All right, we are just now wrapping up the second of 3 sessions on DPM this week. Hopefully many of you got a chance to hear Mike's session on Monday on protecting the data center. On today we did first look, and then just after lunch we're going to do protecting client data. We do have a DPM session including demo capabilities downstairs in the booth, so you're going to actually be able to play with some of the same stuff here. We also have 4 hands-on labs. So you have 3 labs on protecting Exchange, SQL, and SharePoint specifically with 2010. And then the same VMs, for the most part, that you saw today, many of those same configurations are also available in a new hands-on lab downstairs called Technical Introduction to DPM 2012. So we'd love to have you get some feedback on that. I think they were restaging those VHDs this morning based on some feedback from last night that one of them wasn't working entirely. So hopefully that VM will be back online and you guys can experience that for the rest of the week. Any last comments for us?
Do you want to share anything on the new UI?
Were we going to talk about the new UI today? Oh man, I totally forgot we were going to do that. Should we, I don't know, should we tell them about the new UI? All right. All right, no one said anything, so that means I don't have to show and we can just release. All right, yeah, let's do that. I totally forgot. This is going to be like the worldwide public reveal for the new interface, which originally actually wasn't even in plan, right? We were talking about it, and it came in a little bit late, but yes.
By the way, with all the usual caveats that this is not the final UI, right?
Yeah, I should have had a really big banner on that right-hand side that said conceptual screen, subject to change, and don't take pictures. All right, so here's the deal. So we talked a lot about the centralized console. We talked about Operations Manager being that primary and preferred pane of glass. That does not mean the standalone DPM console goes away. Not only does it not go away, but it gets a facelift. It actually, and not only is it cosmetic, but also some great new functionality is added as well. So just to kind of give you a brief walkthrough before we wrap up our session, thank you for reminding me. I would have, who could have had our public debut then? All right, so this is actually, you want to kind of talk us through a couple of these slides?
Right. So what you see actually here is, you'll see that the central theme is actually close to the System Center theme. So when you're actually using your Ops Manager, VMM, and DPM, now you'll actually start to have a very consistent experience. Secondly, we are actually utilizing the facets capability of the new framework, UI framework that we have actually embraced, so that you no longer have to keep switching filters, searching for stuff. Instead, on the left-hand side, for example, in this screen, you can actually see that there are critical errors, there are warning errors. You will be able to see the number right there, and this gives you a very easy way to actually navigate between the various kind of alerts that you have in your environment. The same is true for the jobs view. So when you actually look at the jobs that we have, the in progress, failed, you might have a custom filter that you actually created. You'll now have a seamless ability to actually keep switching between various views by simply clicking it on the left side instead of actually having to go around to searching, using combo boxes, etc. Right? And this model is actually extending not only to the monitoring page, it actually extends to all the management page and all the other screens of DPM product.
Let's take a look. Okay, so we're still in the monitoring view at this point. We can see what kind of jobs have failed or not, right? And shall we go over and take a look
Protection UI, yeah.
Here's the new protection UI. So you can still see the same concept of the protection groups are there. We could also get on that left-hand side status as far as what's actually being synchronized right now, if we have any agent issues, et cetera. So we, again, get some bubbled up alert type of information.
Exactly.
All right, looks like we're going to go down the recovery tab now. So same kind of idea. So we're still going to have that drill down experience on the left-hand side. We're still picking date and time. So and the recovery UI, so far, this is mostly cosmetics, but we see additional functionality as we go into the wizards underneath it.
Right.
Okay.
So the core wizards and other things that you're actually seeing here would actually get improved a bit, and most of the other workflows actually stays the same because you actually need to do the same job. Just because we have a new UI doesn't mean you have a new way of recovering SQL. You don't have a new way of recovering Exchange. So the underlying pieces and the workflows remain the same, where the UI actually gets a facelift. And wherever we have felt that users are spending more repetitive time in switching between tasks, we have actually focused on those to give you the ability to navigate a bit more faster.
That makes sense. And then lastly, tape management also.
So again, on the tape management, what you're actually seeing is the frequent tasks that people do is to actually figure out, okay, which disks are running out of quota, which tapes actually need attention. So on the left-hand side, you'll straight away see that you have the filtering capability, and you can just click on which are the disks approaching quota, and you'll be able to see those disks there. So quick things, filtering capability right there.
Okay, and that actually looks like our last screen.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead.
So I just want to thank all of you, and thanks for taking the time. And I hope that you actually like the features that are coming up with DPM 2012. Remember that you'll get all these capability also on top of 2010, whatever we talked about for centralized management. And once the public beta is out, I'm really looking forward to get good feedback from all of you folks.
So a couple last things. So there's obviously lots of resources we want to make sure you're aware of. We already showed you the sessions that are throughout the rest of the week and the other resources that are on site. A primary place to learn about DPM is always going to be Microsoft.com/DPM. We also have a tech center for more of the 300 level IT Pro depth material. That's technet.microsoft.com/DPM. There is a very active TechNet forum set for DPM as well. Some of our MVPs as well as our dev team. All managing that. And then the primary blog, of course, is blogs.technet.com. If you have questions that we don't get a chance to answer today, you can certainly, easiest way to go actually is to go to the DPM blog and then submit the question there, because there's like a whole bunch of people that actually monitor that. If you have some questions specifically about things that Prabhu and I have talked about, you can get him at Prambrav, P-R-A-M-B-R-A-V, at Microsoft.com. I am JBuff, J-B-U-F-F. And then some of my other information is there as well. Before we take it for questions, though, I always try to give away a couple things during the talk. And so I've got a couple books that we want to give away today as well. This is book is called Data Protection for Virtual Data Centers. It includes DPM 2010. It also includes chapters on things like Exchange, SCR, CCR, SQL mirroring, replication, live migration for clustering. It's pretty much anything that's HADR or backup for the Windows infrastructure. So the way we're going to do this is if you are monitoring, I'm going to use Operations Manager as my first lens. If you are monitoring more than 100 servers in your environment with Operations Manager, but you're not yet wholly backed up with DPM, raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands up if you're at 200. 500? Let's see, what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 1,000. Okay, 1, 2 guys, 2 books. Y'all come up afterwards, and I'll sign them for you and give them out to you. So how many boxes you got? How many?
1,300.
1,300 boxes. Managed with Operations Manager and not yet entirely backed up with DPM. This will be for you. Okay, and what about over here? A little louder. 1,500 plus. Awesome. Okay, so this will get you plugged in with the next part of System Center. So thank you both for coming. With that, we're going to take time for questions, right? Yeah. We've got 9 minutes and 50 seconds left, so it should be a good amount of questions. If you can, it'd be great if you could come and use the mic so we can trap it. If the mics are not turned on, just yell loud and I'll try to repeat the questions. So take some questions and then we're done. If you do leave, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of Tech Ed. Thank you. Thanks. Yes?
Will 2012 support OSD, being able to create a base image using OSD?
Will DPM 2012 be able to support OSD, being able to create a base image using backup? So DPM actually already has a bare metal recovery kind of capability. So in theory, if you had backed up a sysprepped machine and you wanted to use that as how you pushed out a new OS, you could get it from there. Is OSD a specifically supported scenario? No. But if you back up a machine which is sysprepped as a block level BMR scenario and you push that out, you'd actually get most of that result. Yes?
Could you talk a little bit about the scalability limits that you mentioned, and specifically around how a large enterprise, like a large retailer, might consider changing things or looking at a design where we could use DPM
Okay.
with those scalability limits?
So as far as the scalability, you might have some better information as far as how the scalability of a given DPM server does that change much in 2012?
No, the scalability for 2012, the core scalability remains the same. Essentially, it's actually pretty high there. So you can protect all the way up to 2,000 SQL database on a single DPM server, or you can protect 3,000 client desktops.
Right.
You can protect all the way up to 25 terabytes of a SharePoint farm, 80 terabytes of Exchange data, right?
So those are some basic numbers. I think what you're looking for, if you're looking for like a best practice, if you really want to kind of scale that out, one of the things we specifically see, especially around Windows file-based data, so Windows client and Windows file servers, is some of the advancements we're making behind the scenes actually will benefit not only DPM 2012, but also DPM 2010, are around how we interface better with hardware dedupe devices. So today, the rule of thumb, the challenge that most folks have in a large enterprise, especially for like retail, is you've got a lot of data which is actually very similar to each other spread across your entire farm, right? So what you get back is you get back 1,000 different sites, and each one has data which is probably 90% common and 10% deltaed out in many branch scenarios. And tell me if I'm off on this one, but all right. So then the trick is, though, is that when we bring all that data back, it makes the storage pool really, really big, even though you and I both know in our heart of hearts that a lot of that data is common. So one of the things we try to do is we're trying to do better work to actually pair up with the hardware-based dedupe providers. Here's the trick. Today, with DPM 2010, you can use any dedupe device which presents itself as block-level storage, whether it's Fibre Channel connected or whether it's iSCSI connected. As long as it presents itself as block, then DPM will then turn around and see it as just locally mounted disk in the disk admin, and we can happily use that. What we don't get to take advantage of today are dedupe devices that are offering themselves as a CIF share. They're actually offering themselves as a NAS, not as a SAN. So, but even then, there's the case of, okay, so if it offers itself as block, are we really doing all the right things we can to really take advantage of that? Some of the work that we're doing in DPM 2012 to actually do better integration with the hardware dedupe devices, that just having those will give you a lot of, I think, what you're looking for from a scalability perspective. The manageability on the operations manager side will give you that one pane of glass. Having that dedupe on the back will actually let you have more scalable back-end storage for the DPM boxes, those are the two places you have to scale out if you're really going to do distributed retail or distributed branch at all. And just as kind of a little bit of a tease, some of the stuff that we're doing in DPM 2012 to allow for that hardware integration actually is back compat. So some of your DPM 2010 with a KB update will actually be able to take advantage of that in the future as well once we've got it finished out. So that's the big guidance is certainly use a single pane of glass in the front. Absolutely embrace auto deployment in a big way. There's a white paper that should be out by the time we deploy talking about how you can actually have the DPM agent as part of your primary build. So whether you're using it from an OSD perspective or just from an image that you push out, get that agent preloaded just because it makes it more manageable, and then how do you connect that back? And then to make your storage more scalable on the back end, use some dedupe hardware to pair it up with. Yes?
Will the data source limit be increased or stay the same?
data source per DPM server. That number stays roughly the same. The engine for DPM 2010 to 2012 doesn't change considerably. 100 productions, typically by the time you hit the 100 production servers or the 2,000 databases and the other numbers that he talked about, the 3,000 clients, typically by the time you hit that number, you've actually, more often than not, you've actually hit the storage max that you'd want to strap onto a single Windows server, which is why I leaned directly into hardware dedupe in order to shrink that footprint down. But the actual number of data sources, connections per DPM server, that doesn't actually change because the engine doesn't appreciably change.
Yeah, we did change it a lot between 2007 and 2010. But
Yeah.
from 2010 to 2012, it's roughly the same.
Okay. On the aisle. SharePoint search.
SharePoint search. I
We-
might have to get back to.
Let me reconfirm that because we did it in 2007. It was an extensible component, and then it actually wasn't in the 2010 RTM because that was actually the same time that SharePoint 2010 was RTMing, and one of the trains left the station before the other one did. So I know we've had conversations on that, but I don't know what the final resolution was. So that's a good one to actually send off to the blog alias, to go to the DPM blog and send the note there. Because that way we can actually connect with the guy who actually owns the SharePoint feature and interfaces with the SharePoint team. We'll get that answered for you. Probably make a good blog post too. In fact, actually, I'll say I should just mention. So just this week, the DPM support team actually wrote a new blog post on protecting the whole SharePoint farm. So you might want to go check that out as part of the experience. It's not just the steps from the documentation. I haven't read the blog post yet, but it is a 2010-centric post. So, all right, last question, then we're going to shore out. Yes?
Yeah, I know one of the enhancements that you guys made in 2010 was the ability to do site-to-site replication to an offsite DPM server. Has anything changed between 2010 and 2012, or is anything in the works in changing in regards to that?
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. So there's lots of ways to get your data out of the building. And if you've ever heard me talk before, I'll tell you that is one of the main things that I am most passionate about. Number one, your primary goal with backup is it's not about tape, it's not about disk, it's about get your data out of the building. I swear by that. So there's actually a couple ways to do that. Within DPM today, we have this concept called DPM to DPM for DR. Meaning that you can replicate your data. What we showed you today is a lot of production servers being replicated back to a primary DPM box. What you can do to give yourself a disaster recovery capability is simply put another DPM server in another premise and then just point at the primary. And so now your data goes from many to one to one. And so that's a disaster recovery kind of capability for that. It's more specifically, it would be a data survivability scenario. And then you put all the process and procedure to give yourself a little DR. That functionality doesn't appreciably change between 2010 and 2012 because similarly to the engine, we did a lot of our uplifting between 2007 and 2010. So that model doesn't actually appreciably change. By the way, I turned off the mic. Wasn't that cool?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sound like the thunder of God for just a second. All right. So that doesn't really change. But again, you get a lot more of that better experience because you're using that same pane of glass. I will tell you that if you get a chance to do some of the disaster recovery type scenario stuff that we've been covering at these last events, using operations managers at pane of glass and also leveraging DPM to DPM for DR starts to become really sexy as a true business continuity scenario because now you can actually put in the rest of the system center. You can use operations manager to decide the primary side is down. Then you can then let Orchestrator, what was Opalis, cut off a runbook to set off a disaster recovery scenario. Then let VMM actually stand up virtual machines in place of the physical machines that have failed, and then have DPM repopulate the data behind the scenes, and then notify Operations Manager when you're done. And you could actually automate the complete site-level recovery experience just from using System Center. By the way, that's Chapter 12. So, all right.
So,
Small gratuitous plug. One other thing, though. This whole math works if you have 2 sites or more, right? So the other thing is that if you don't have 2 sites, or if you're in a scenario where you just, for auditing or from politic purposes, you want to have that data managed offsite by somebody else, we've got some great partners, in fact, down in the System Center Alliance area, that'll actually they'll take your on-premise DPM scenario and actually take that to their off-premise scenario for you. So there's some great partnering that you can do from that as well. All right, that is our last question. So we should go ahead and wrap up.
Yeah, one last point I would actually add is that we are increasing the scalability of the DR scenario. So previously, if you could DR 300 data sources, that limit is actually getting bumped up with 2012.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the week.